Good evening all and welcome to this week's weekly wrap. A little bit later than usual, but there's been no racing on Monday to Wednesday, so I don't think we've missed much on that score anyway. But earlier in the weekend we had the action at Sandown, Ffos and Musselburgh with their trials day. So tonight we've got Dave, James and Roy to go through the action. Evening fellas.
Yep. No. Evening.
What we'll do is we'll start with Willie Mullins coming over and winning a Grade 1. Normally it's over the smaller obstacles, but this time around he's won it over fences Rory with Jitan Jabele in the Celial Novices. Everyone must be quaking in the boots at the Willie Mullins and the chase start for Cheltenham.
Yeah. Someone has to mention Willie Mullins can't train chasers, but there is, I suppose, a criticism inherent there in how well or otherwise his chasers tend to develop. And a lot of horses look like superstars at 5 and 6 and don't always last the course as well as someone like Paul Nicholls can do with him. So I don't think anyone suggests that Willie can't train chasers, but Jitan Jabele put up a decent performance. It must be borne in mind that the City Isles Novices chase is one of the weakest Group 1s in the calendar as a rule. This was a pretty strong renewal on paper, but it often throws up slightly funny results, to be honest. Not that this was one. I thought she was, she deserved to win it. We didn't know quite how good she was based on her chase debut. Showed you had smart hurdles form, but she's getting 11 pounds from everything else in the race. She got a dreadful ride from winning on her chase debut at Limerick, the point I made at the time, and again when I wrote the race up beforehand, where she scampered into a long lead against moderate opposition, and turning for home, she was about 15-20 lengths clear and cruising, and Danny Mullins, who rode her, then suddenly decided, oh, maybe I should give her an education. And he's taken a massive tug with about 3 fences to jump, so that she's reduced her lead by half. And then he's strangled her into every fence up the straight, which meant that her jumping looked dreadful. But I think if he just give her head and let her jump the fences, she'd have been impressive. So the form that she'd shown on debut wasn't strong, based on how far she'd beaten that opposition by. But we knew she had plenty of ability, and Darrell Jacob didn't mess around with her. This time, again, he allowed her to do her own thing, give her head, and her jumping was very good on the whole. So, she looks decent. The tricky thing for her is the obvious race for her for Cheltenham. At Cheltenham would be a soft ground 2.5 mile novices chase, which she will get. There was a lot of debate after this about whether there should be a mare's novice chase at the Cheltenham Festival, but those who were proposing that need a good shoeing, quite frankly. With apologies to Declan Rice.
I think that's a fair comment, Ed. James, the first race which did spring to mind in relation to Cheltenham was the JLT. Obviously, Willie Mullins already has the tour for that. What would you think about a possible JLT bid? I know the connections are pretty much and ahhing, but do you think she'd have a chance to be there or thereabouts come the finish?
I wouldn't be hugely keen, as Roy said, to enjoy the soft ground, and I think she's got some way to go to be near Petit Zig and Vautour. I think the race fell apart really because Splash of Ginge didn't seem to handle the course at all. Champagne West didn't jump at all, and Grimessi wasn't up to the task. And I think Paul Nicholls said beforehand that Irish Saint he thought would improve for the run. And I think he's a little bit overrated anyway. So in the end, she jumped well on a tricky course and she was impressive. But whether that's up to the sort of style that you've seen from Petit Zig and Vautour, I'm not sure. Beforehand, I thought Champagne West would win, and people were saying, Mick Fitzgerald was saying that he was worried about his jumping and how he charged into fences, and I wasn't convinced. I thought he had excuses when he beat Unace when he was jumping. It was poor because he was left in front and the ground was tacky, but he was spot on because he barely took off at anything. He just ran into each fence. No time he actually did have a go at one. It was the first of the railways second time round and jumped that well. And the very next fence he came down. So that was disappointing. But I don't think you can knock Petit Zig for that because I think Champagne West was far better at Cheltenham than he was here. And it's a shame he's out for the season because he was looking like a decent contender when he stepped up to 3 miles, but we'll have to wait till next season now. And after he's had to go to the Paddy Power, according to Philip Hobbs.
It looks the obvious target for him for next season. Dave, I think the connections were and ahhing about possibly headgear for Grumetti somewhere down the line after. I think did he won at Plumpton last time out? Was there anything in there as a handicap possibly? And what about Splash of Ginge? Would you give him another chance in something like the Burn Group Plate at Cheltenham?
Yeah, I think as James alluded to, Splash of Ginge hanging badly on the bend after as they set out onto the second circuit, clearly wasn't handling the track, and that's the third time. I think that's only the third time in his career he's gone right-handed. He's had getting on for 20 runs now, and he's only had 3 right-handed, and he's yet to. Okay, a couple of them were quite early in his career, but he's yet to sort of excel right-handed. So yeah, back left-handed again. You're obviously going to give him. You're obviously going to give him some sort of a chance in the Cheltenham handicap. Far too soon to write him off after run after run, full run like that. Grumetti, I don't know. I mean, the Plumpton run where he beat Crispy Green probably wasn't up to a great deal anyway. Crispy Green is one of those horses that's fairly sort of easily beatable, and then before that he's run behind Vivato Baltat hinted that, you know, he is what he is. He's around about a sort of mid 140s horse. But he was disappointed again. He had cheap pieces, didn't seem to make a great deal of difference. He's not one I'd certainly want to be piling onto next time, regardless of headgear, I have to say.
James, for you, I think both James and Roy have been interested in the Contenders Hurdle. James, for you, from a Supreme point of view, coming into the straight, I thought Jolly Adam had the beating of Gardel, the Victoire, and I think he just lost himself or lost chance at the last, and possibly floundering a bit on the ground. But I think it's the usual statement of he's going to make a smashing chaser next year, and anything over hurdle as a bonus is relevant when it concerns to Jolly Allen.
Yeah, I mean that's the line. Harry Fry spent a lot of time saying he's a work in progress and looking forward to chasing, but he's making nice sort of incremental improvements with each start. And yeah, as he came into the straight, he suddenly seemed to sort of pick the bit up and look travelling best going to second last, and he just got a little bit distracted when Gardel Victoire jumped a bit left across him, and he sort of ignored the hurdle almost, and that lost him momentum and a bit of ground, and that might have made a difference in the end. But he jumped the last fine, and then again he probably thought he was going to win there, but he just was sort of out-battled by a hardy horse, also more experience of the sort of tough tests like in the Greatwood. Gardel Victoire won well. He showed he handled that ground, whereas Jolly Allen probably wants it a bit quicker, sound the surface so he can show his speed, because I think he is quite a fast horse, and with that experience under his belt, it'll be invaluable for Cheltenham. I mean, it's easy to be a bit disappointed when you look at Duvan and Lamy Serge coming out and winning incredibly easily in these races, that they're dominating, and you see him getting beaten by a relatively exposed rival, but Gardel Victoire's exposed at quite a decent level, and you've got to imagine he's Jolly Allen's still a little bit gormless, I think, and he's not 100% knowing what to do over his hurdle still. And if he can work that out and get that sharpness, I think he's got every chance to be involved in a relatively thin-looking Supreme, especially when you think about LBC Ville this weekend. Suddenly, lots of money coming for him for the Neptune, and if that's his target, that's another one sort of knocked out. And I'm not sure there are too many who have the quality to be involved in the Supreme at this stage. So I wouldn't be keen to knock him, and he's not a mad each way punch at the moment, I don't think.
So while we're coming into the race, coming out of the Christmas period, you're looking at Bristol Demise one at Chepstow, possibly the highlight in relation to the juveniles. What did you make of performance on Saturday? And I noticed a bit of a conversation between yourself and Kevin O'Malley on Twitter about Jolly Allen and the Supreme bid earlier today as well.
Yeah, to deal with Kevin, first of all, Kevin suggested he would shave his eyebrows if Jolly Allen didn't make the frame in the Supreme with a clear run. So I thought that was an interesting shot. He spent a lot of time. I'm not at all against Jolly Allen. I saw one or two people call him a dog. after the performance. I think that's very harsh, given that although Gardner Victoire is the same age as him, he's got an awful lot more experience. And experience counted at Sandown on Saturday. Jolly Allen, not as clearly the winner had the run of the race anyway. Jolly Allen not as fluent, but travelled very strongly and got himself to the front briefly. But as Gardner Victoire showed at Cheltenham in November, in a very classy race in the Great Wood Hurdle, he's a hard horse to pass when he's been able to set his own fractions. He's very professional, and it's just the extra experience that saw him home in the day. Jolly Allen gives the impression that he will come up to scratch in time. He's got to learn a little bit, but you do get the impression that we'll see the best of him next year rather than this spring. And a race like the Supreme, where you can't afford to make mistakes, might just be too much, especially if it turns out to be a fast ground, which wouldn't be an issue for him in itself. It just means that they go that little bit quicker and mistakes tend to be punished more. That's the worry with him, not that he's not good enough to mix it there. Bristol de Mai was the horse I liked in the race going into it, and he ended up being disappointing. It was only his second run here. He was hugely impressive in the finale at Chepstow. No reason to believe that that was a fluke. He came with a big reputation anyway. And he didn't seem to be suited by the nature of this race. And he was maybe keener than he looked. And after travelling very well, he didn't find much off the bridle. I'd like to see him in a different sort of race next time out. I'd be very disappointed, given his scope and the impression he made at Chepstow, if he doesn't turn out to be a top-class horse in time. But maybe he's at a stage now where he needs to mature, with connections having more obvious candidates for the Triumph Hurdle. It'd be interesting to see where they go with him. But I said this when he won at Chepstow. His jumping was a joy to watch that day. Jumped his hurdles like he would jump a fence sooner rather than later. And I would still be very positive of him going forward, despite the fact that this was undoubtedly a disappointing performance in the day.
Dave, we've not really touched on what we did there, just slightly about Garde la Victoire. He's a very hardy horse, isn't he? Last year he had 7 runs. We possibly one of the only races he disappointed in was at Cheltenham, where he wasn't really as front running or front rank anyway compared to previously. And if you look at it this year, the only really even slight disappointment would have been again in the Ladbroke, where he wasn't really front running, and in the Ascot over 2 mile forwards, I don't think he quite probably got home over. So is obviously Garde la Victoire deserves some credit for his win on Saturday, and I think they're looking at the County Hurdle and the Coral Cup. Could he not possibly have a little tilt further down the line, something like Aintree Hurdle, maybe in the spring?
Yeah, you'd think that would be a sort of natural progression target for him, given that 2.5 on a flat track might be absolutely ideal for him. He's going to find things a lot harder. I mean, the handicap has left him off the same mark from Saturday, but even so, he'll find trying to dictate terms a county hurdle, a different kettle of fish. He was allowed it in the Great Wood because nothing particularly wanted. So he was allowed to set his own fractions, whereas in a cavalry chart like the county hurdle is going to be, he will find it a different kettle of fish. He does deserve some credit. He doesn't hit the headlines, does he? He's not a headline horse, and yet he's been progressive now for the best part of 18 months really. So he deserves a lot of credit on that front. Yeah, I couldn't see him in the Coral Cup. I know he won over 2.5 at Cheltenham last spring, but I've never seen him really as a Coral Cup type. He might be a little bit more difficult to place in handicaps, and certainly something like the Aintree Hurdle, where you may get a smaller field and he might be able to dictate terms. Might suit him a bit better.
Stay with you, Dave. You mentioned earlier about Splash of Ginge not going right-handed. One of the chasers who did on the card, or certainly does looking at his form book, is Loev for Lucy Wadham. Lucy Wadham certainly has a string in fine form at the moment. She had El Dancer finishing a good second in the feature handicap hurdle on the card. You had Loev winning the handicap chase. You won at Sandown Market Race and Kempton Huntingdon. Is it pretty much a case of keep on Loev's side when he's going right-handed?
Yeah, I think not only that. I think I know you look at his Sandown record now, and it's starting to build up. I think his last 3 runs there have now been 2-1-1. So clearly he's building up some affinity with the track. But I think the key with Le Rev this season, as opposed to last season, because he was fairly highly tried last season, don't forget, but he's a big horse, and he just couldn't sort his feet out last year. But I think this year, I mean, you look how he's travelled on Saturday. He's travelled like the best horse throughout that contest, and I thought you could call him the winner as long as he found something, and he did. He usually does, and you could call him the winner quite some way out. And the way that he's jumped them down the back and the railway fences was a joy to watch. It really was. That got him there to within sort of 2 lengths of the leaders without actually doing anything whatsoever. So he's been put up £7 for that. He's now off a mark of 146, but that's still going to leave him with a nice racing weight come better 365 time. And as long as there's some cut, I think he wants some cut. Gets away with good to soft. I don't think he want it any quicker than that. As long as there's some cut in the ground, I think he's definitely a player in the better 365. Yes.
James, on the handicap front on the card, you had Brick Redvin in the handicap chase, who obviously franked the form to a point of Mr. Mola Goes in the game straight at the weekend, and you had a bit of a turn up in the Grade 3 handicap hurdle with Invicta Lake, 20-1 shot, winning the over 2 mile 6 for Susie Smith. Was there any performances in those handicap races as a whole which took your eye?
Well, I still think Junction 14 is a horse that's going to win one of these races. He was a bit keen on Saturday behind Invicta Lake, but he looked to have every chance he came to the straight bit on that tough testing ground that had been opened up by that point. He just faded, and I think he has got another one of these races in him, because he was so good last season. But I think he might need better ground, and when he gets that, he should find it easier and could win a race at decent odds later on in the season.
Yeah, I think he's finished behind. Is it Batavia, one of yours, which you fancied earlier in the season in Canton?
Yeah.
Rory, sorry.
Yeah, I thought Batavia looks like a horse they're running for the attempts, doesn't he? So that form's probably quite strong.
And Rory, the handicap action on Saturday at Sandown, was there anything for you to take out?
I thought it was moderate, to be perfectly honest. That Grade 3 handicap hurdle was, as you remember, a World Hurdle winner in the past, hasn't it? But it was a bit of a joke event for the class. There was nothing really at 140 plus in it, and I thought the form was potentially muddling. Fair play to Invicta Lake for fighting back from a fall last time to win this in decent style, but because it's a Grade 1 track on a decent day's racing, I think the handicap is liable to overreact to some of the form shown. And again, while I'm a fan of Le Rev, and I put him up at the weekend, £7 higher mark makes life very, very tough for him indeed. The Bet365 Gold Cup, I suppose, end of the season will suit him very well because he stays and he has an affinity for the track, and that race doesn't tend to be about handicapping, actually, doesn't it? But I wouldn't want to back anything I saw at Sandown in the short term, to be honest. I thought it was... I think, and we'll no doubt touch on this, the introduction of that Ffos last card has weakened the Sandown card to a degree. You've got 2 races in the Welsh Champion Hurdle and the West Wales Grand National that simply take runners away from similar contests at Sandown. And I don't think it's... I think it's to the detriment of racing as a whole. So, I think... I'll not touch on Ffos last particularly at the moment, but I thought the Sandown card was modest apart from 1 or 2 races. And traditionally, because this ends up being run on quite bad ground, people are looking for Cheltenham clues. I think that there historically tends to be a bit of an overreaction to any decent performances, and a lot of horses who do well here tend to struggle afterwards anyway. So I'm inclined to put a big line for the entire meeting, really.
You mentioned there about the Ffos last card. We'll go on to it now with the Welsh Champion Hurdle. Paul Nicholls banging in another Saturday winner. He'd have been a prime candidate for something like the 2 mile 6 race, and he was able to pocket a a nice 50k pot here by winning fairly comfortably, coming away from a revitalised Ffos, and for your information, it looked a bit as though going out the back of a telly like many of the runners in the Welsh National Chase, the West Wales National Chase a little bit later, but he seemed to run late on and show there's still something off there for marker 131.
Yeah, Silsall was impressive, and he's been impressive a couple of times this season. The issue with him in terms of following him in other races this season is you don't really see him getting into conditions at Cheltenham or Aintree. It's a possibility. Punches time might be better for him. For some reason, the rain always seems to come down at punches time. But he's been impressive on soft ground in Newbury and here on heavy ground at Ffos Las. Those are clearly conditions that work very well for him. And it's a classy performance to carry 11 stone 10 in the conditions. Again, the slight issue I have with the race is that quite a lot of them seem to fail to handle underfoot conditions, and the form behind the winner is potentially misleading. Kate Moss bounced back to finish second and briefly looked a big threat, but I thought too many horses disappointed for it to be strong form overall. And while Silsall is now banging at the door on the graded races, it's not a race that I would again be looking for horses to come out of.
Yeah, James, last year we had the likes of we had Salubrious and Federae competing in decent handicap hurdles at the likes of Ffos Las, and throwing up potential world hurdle types this time around. Silsall is a bit short of that bracket at the moment, but there's to be fair, Jack Sherwood seems to have also got a bit of a partnership going with him as well.
Yeah, it's a nice partnership, isn't it? When Paul Nicholls has a plan, you've got to take note and be careful. And he had a plan to make sure Jack Sherwood didn't ride until he got on Silsall, to make sure he kept a £7 claim, and it obviously worked out particularly well. It was a very dour performance in that ground, and Paul Nicholls suggested afterwards they thought they might go for the entry hurdle, which I think could be lapped in probably. I can't imagine him, unless it's absolutely bottomless, can't imagine him having too much of a say in that, but he's putting a good performance in there. And I think you're right about, for your information, he was up there quite handy for most of the race, and then about the fourth last he put in a slow jump and was just sort of shuffled back, and he ended up right at the back of the field, and seemingly struggling all of a sudden because of sort of it conspired against him at that point. But he did well to carry on and pick up, and after his run there previously when he won another hurdle narrowly, I think he has got more in the locker, and I think he's better than he's looked on both those recent starts.
It'd be interesting to see what Rebecca Curtis can do with him, especially if she keeps on bringing Paul Townend over as well for the rides at those Welsh tracks. Dave, I muted your microphone while we were trying to get a better angle of you, so you'll have to unmute that before you start answering this question. But for the handicap hurdle, the Welsh Champion hurdle, what did you make of the race? And I'm guessing then you can lead us into the nice West Wales National Chase.
Sorry, Dan, who are you asking that?
Dave, is he gone? I must have gone. We'll go to you, Rory. Welsh National Chase. Was it a lovely spectacle?
He was holding that pose for an awfully long time, isn't he?
It's his better side. Yeah. But what were your thoughts on? Obviously, there's a lot of talk about the horse who finished in second. It was definitely a race of survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest was Bob Ford, Rebecca Curtis, who probably be able to tough it out more than most. But yeah, Callum Williams and Gorgeously Edged. Was it for you?
The whole Callum Williams thing is a sideshow. It's not an irrelevance, but it's a different argument. This is one of those races where you have to have 4 or 5 separate discussions and realise what terms you're talking about before you cross over with them. Well, most of the talk's been about Callum Williams. Let's put that to bed fairly quickly. He did something that was reasonably sensible, and most jockeys would have been doing it 5 years ago. You know, you're tailed off in a valuable event. Well, actually, he wasn't tailed off, was he? He was just dropped by the winner between the last two fences and immediately floundered in a race where there was a lot of money for the second. He realised he wasn't going to be able to jump the fence. Then also realised shortly after that there was nothing else in the race. So he thought, well, I should get second. So he's just turned the horse around and jumped the fence again after letting him get his breath back, as he said. And no one would have turned. No one would have thought anything of that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. But we now have a new set of rules in about, specifically about remounting, and again, this has come up in the conversation, whether he's broken any rules, and whether the rule about if you pull up, you must not jump any further fences, whether that's about jockeys who pull up and dismount and then think, oh, okay, well, I'll just hack back. The rules are a little bit ambiguous in that regard. But what Callum did was perfectly sensible from his point of view. The bottom line is, it's up to the stewards to know what is and isn't acceptable in these situations. And I think this has introduced a degree of uncertainty for the future, because we had things like the stewards called him in and asked him about what happened. They accepted he pulled up. There is a specific rule that says if you pull up at any point in a race, you must not jump any more obstacles, which they've chosen to ignore. And then they've had the horse checked over by the vet and said the vet found nothing wrong with him. But the whole reason why a raft of new rules were brought in about stopping jockeys remounting is that they wanted to take it out of the hands of jockeys to decide whether it was okay to remount horses who'd unseated or fallen. Because you can't always tell with a horse who's being remounted quickly, who's got lots of adrenaline running through his system, whether there's an injury there or not. And therefore, you can't simply let a jockey remount and then check the horse over afterwards and go, you see, he'd actually broken a leg and you shouldn't have got back on again. If it's not obvious what's happened at the time, the idea is that you play it safe. And I think the stewards have crossed the line in terms of going back to the old days. And there may be nothing wrong with the old days, but that's not the steward's point of view. And what frustrated me about the race is that you can have this grey area with stewarding in this country, where the Ffos last steward said no rules have been broken, nothing's wrong here. Whereas in an identical scenario, where, for example, the horse tries to jump the last and falls and injures himself, which Gorgeous Liège nearly did, by the way, if you watch the replay of that. The stewards reported that he jumped the last without difficulty and just cantered to the line. It took him about 5 seconds to get over the last fence when he was tried again. And it's very easy in that situation with a tired horse to take a bad fall. You have to be going very fast for a fall to be bad. Rotational falls are the worst, and that's the kind of fall you're going to get in that scenario. So there's no point asking the vet afterwards. And there needs to be clarity as to whether that's okay or not. I wouldn't blame the jockey for a second. It's a very unusual situation to find yourself in, and you can argue no rule was broken by arguing about what the definition of pulling up is. If you say we didn't really pull up, he just gave his horse 2 chances to jump the fence, or he gave it a rest before jumping the fence, he didn't really pull up, then you can get around the rule. But I think there needs to be leadership from the stewards. But at the same time, I don't want to see jockeys hung out to dry. It was a very similar situation a few years ago at Cheltenham, when Roddy Green was unseated in a very soft incident at the last. Mr. Green was still allowed to remount at Cheltenham on a very moderate horse who was racing for minor prize money, essentially in what was a decent novice chase. But everything else failed to complete apart from the winner, and he would have picked up £6,000 for second. So he remounted and walked over the line. And then it turned out subsequently the horse was lame, but it wasn't obvious to anyone watching the race that it was. He picked up a 10-day ban for it, and there's no difference between that scenario and this scenario. You can't have the benefit of hindsight in making decisions. So I know I'm rambling on about that, but that's the thing that got me most about the race. It was also no fun to watch. And I think staying handicap chases are meant to be fun to watch.
Yeah, I think for three and a half miles race, which was what it was, there wasn't any point of it which was exciting because Bob Ford was there throughout from the lead and had it all his own way. Dave, we'll come back to you on this West Wales National. In between Matt Chapman having a rant and not letting Chris Cook and Big Mac have his word, there was actually a decent point which Big Mac made for once, and that was there was no rule in the race book about you can't actually backtrack or retrace your steps during a race. Now, that for me that's common sense where you'd have that in a race where obviously there's possible dangers of people working in the track doing all the potholes or the footings of the fences, landing sides, just filling the holes as the race is ongoing. Should that be a rule which would come in to possibly negate this going forward, where it gives a chance for a rider to pull up or not to pull up but retrace steps and try again, jump a hurdle or a flight in a chase, in a fence?
Well, there needs to be, as Roy's alluded to, it's something of a grey area, isn't it? Unfortunately, as to what he's exactly done. Has he refused? Has he pulled up? Has he given the horse a breather, given it time again to get back over? That there needs to be something in place that's far more robust than the rule that they've actually got in place at the moment, because it just leaves it open to interpretation, as was the case here. For me, I mean, Rory's covered it all off very well. I know it's something that we've discussed. For me, as much as Callum has, of course, done the right thing as far as connections are concerned, he knows that there's prize money to be picked up if you can get gorgeously age over. You do at a time when the BHA are peddling the line that horses' safety is paramount, that then this is allowed to go on. I mean, God forbid that anything happened at the last. Those with an agenda against racing and an axe to grind would have had an absolute field day. And I have no doubt it would have been on the front of a couple of red tops on Monday morning. We just cannot allow that to happen again. Something has to be put into place that is more robust than we have now to stop that from happening again. There can be no grey areas.
James, if it was taken out of the jockey's hands and it was given to the stewards and possibly race readers who saying that horse should be pulled up or that horse looks exhausted, is there even a way to police that, or should we just leave it as it is at the moment, where it's in the jockey's hands, and if they feel as though the horse is lame or exhausted, then pull up. If not, then allow him to finish his race, and obviously allow the opportunity of Karen Williams on Gorgeous Liège to happen again in the future.
I think you were right earlier when you were saying you need to sort of stop the loophole of going back, retracing your steps, and finishing the race off, because that can cause issues. Whether they should leave the jockeys to decide, I mean, it's probably the best at the moment. I mean, I'm not sure how easy it is to tell during a race if the horse is completely exhausted. I suspect the jockeys know better, but you always leave room for abuse if you leave it up to people in that situation. So it's a difficult task, I think. I just think they need to close these loopholes and make sure you can't be criticised for causing harm to horses when it's unnecessary, and that's the only way you can restrict those desperately trying to criticise the sport.
Speaking of desperate, obviously the ground was desperate at Ffos last, but the ground was a little bit better come Sunday and the Cheltenham Trials Day at Musselburgh. We'll stay with you, James, for the races on the card. What did you make of the quality of the card on Sunday? I know Nicky Henderson sent a couple of decent horses up, and he collected with a couple of prizes as well.
I think the Henderson horses sent up with the sort of the higher quality operators who could be interesting when it comes to the spring festivals. I think a couple of the chases like If and But Why Not and Seventh Sky both won slightly disappointing races. Some If and But Why Not's race that nothing had seemed to jump well. And it was a good ride from McCoy, sort of dragging over the line in front. And in Seventh Sky's race, he gave away plenty of ground at each fence, jumping left, and still managed to win. So you'd have to be a bit disappointed with that. It'd be interesting to see how he fares in the Kingmaker. I think he's planning on running this weekend straight away again. But I suspect he's found a good opportunity there and sort of be handed the race. But the Henderson pair, Hargam in the Triumph trial was very, very impressive. He beat up Stark Attack to Peace and Co. Absolutely thrashed at Doncaster, and he's appreciated. I think he's appreciated the flat track and the quick ground, and he's looked very, very good. And it's another little boost for Dave's Karazak. That's a positive, but I'm not sure he's going to be so effective at the festival. He's certainly up there, but I think he's a bit behind Peace and Co. at the moment. I thought Dowland put in a nice performance. He's been a bit of a tricky customer so far. And up to 3 miles, it seemed to suit him because he likes to just sort of throw his toys out of the pram at some stage during the race. And when they're going that bit slower, it didn't quite matter. He had a sort of flat spot at the top of the straight before they turned in. But he recovered quite quickly and won quite impressively. I think if you had to pick a horse from the day that I could see winning at Cheltenham, he would be the one. I think a race like the Temps, now he's qualified, will suit the tempo of the race, and he has time to pick up at the end, and when he does, he seems to show a really impressive burst as he did at Haydock, I think, and he did it there. I think those two Henderson horses were the most interesting of the day, and they're probably two to keep an eye on. I think the Albert Bartlett trial, there was nothing of particularly high quality in that race. I mean, Shanrose Santos has sort of showed quite a significant improvement in a short space of time. But Lucy Wadham, who's clearly an informed trainer with obviously the Rev on Saturday, but I think he's probably more of a future prospect. He's going to go to Cheltenham, but I think he'll be an outsider, and rightly so.
Rory, one of the horses which finished behind Shanrose Santos in that race was Seldom In, and I think Sandy Thompson has got another nice staying hurdler and possibly chaser with him on his hands, and also Some Plans win in the Supreme trial. Wasn't that deep in relation to the numbers, but I thought it had a bit of quality about the way he went about things, and it'd be interesting, maybe not this year for Cheltenham, but certainly next year.
Yeah, it's difficult getting that.
Have we lost him? Just before we're going to get Sandy Thompson loving as well. Dave, we'll come to you. You'll have to fill in for him and tell him about how much he sends love letters to Sandy Thompson, and obviously thinking it was Graham Cunningham and thinking it was a Miss or Mrs. Sandy Thompson rather than a Mr. But what did you think of the two performances? Not like say Some Plan finished behind. I think it was Seedling in the Cheltenham edition a bit earlier in the season, but he looks a potential nice chaser in the making for next year.
Yeah, he does. We will mention both Seldom In and apologies for the pronunciation of Ushkabitha of Lucinda Russell's. Although, as James alluded to, there probably wasn't that much strength in depth for the Albert Bartlett trial. I don't think the first three were all sort of nice horses. The second and third were both eye catchers in the race, and Seldom In next season is going to make I think quite a nice chaser. Some Plan I was delighted with because obviously Seedling was one that was being touted up for the Betfair this weekend, but unfortunately Warren's horses have gone a bit off the bridle. I think he's having a bit of a quiet time at the moment. Warren's got no runners out, which would suggest that the stable might not quite be firing on all cylinders. But Seedling will definitely be an interesting one come spring. He'll be off a mark in handicaps that will still be able to work off, and Some Plan winning here. But I've seen him win the time before, and he is. Although, okay, Elner Moose doesn't run his race, but there's no reason to suggest that the Grey Taylor hasn't. And he looked one of the North's more promising sorts before this race, and Some Plan put him to bed very easily. Definitely one for next season's Some Plan, and it was good to see him pay a compliment in such a way.
Obviously, this weekend we've got a bit of a feast of action. We've got Super Saturday at Newbury, and also we've got Super Sunday to Nick Sky's tagline for the Hennessy card over in Ireland. James, have you had a quick look at the weekend's entries? Is there anything which sticks out like a sore thumb for you? Especially, I'm guessing you've probably got a little bit of close eyes in the Deloitte hurdle with last year. I think the Tullow tank, and obviously finishing second to Vitor, taking a hand in, well, Vitor certainly in the Supreme. Anything which pointers for Cheltenham, you'd hope?
Yeah, well, obviously there's been money. As I said earlier, there's been money for Alvaro Veal for Cheltenham today, and I think they're expecting good things from him on Sunday. I'm not sure the Deloitte this year is the strongest renewal you'll ever see, but I don't think he could have been any more exciting on his hurdling debut, and I'm looking forward to him putting up his Neptune or Supreme claim, whatever they decide on Sunday. Obviously, Identity Thief is probably the main danger, but I quite fancy him to outclass them, and it certainly sticks out from the weekend. But yeah, I've looked at Newbury, and again, the first novice hurdle looks like it could be a very, very nice race, but I'm not really sure what's going to run. There are a few very interesting potentials, but I have to wait for the declarations. In the staying handicap hurdle, it's interesting to see Closing Ceremony entered again. Another Lavelle horse I mentioned, but he really bumped into him, I think, last time at Warwick when he beat the rest of the field quite well, but joined the clan. Pound Claimer was just out in front, and he's gone on to win again this weekend at Wetherby, and I think Closing Ceremony seems very solid and can easily win another one of these races. And obviously you have the proper graded races at Newbury as well. I fear Sada Grugi's going to have very few runners to take him on if McManus only runs Mr. Mole or Zondra. I suspect Mr. Mole. But it'll be obviously very interesting to see what Sada Grugi can do and how recovered he is. I suspect he's going to be pretty straight for the race because they need to find out, as they did with French Sacre, how he's going to return. And I hope he can win well and come back to Cheltenham as a potential favourite for the champion chase. And then it's great to see also Takan Desoy. Seemingly, John Joe says today he's going to run him in the Denman chase. At the start of the season, I thought he was going to be proper Gold Cup contender, and it's not worked out when he's been running when John Joe's horses have been off, and he's had a difficult time. And I suspect he might need this because they said his blood wasn't right only a couple of weeks ago. But I hope he can show something like his true colours, and they can decide where to go at Cheltenham, because if they can get him on top form back then, I think he is dangerous. Obviously, he's taking on Coney Gree, and they thought about the Argento or the Bet-Bright chase as it is now, and he was slightly off for that, but he's coming and taking on the big boys in this race, and I think he'll be quite difficult to peg back if he jumps as well as he has done, and in this soft ground he could grind them down and make them struggle. Ublon Zobo looks like it might be favourite, something close to it. I think he's a solid horse, but I think he's very beatable. And if Coney Gree can show improved form from the Campton race to Cato Star, I think he can win the Denman and do a quite interesting, unusual double. And then obviously the Betfair Hurdle. It's a very open race. You can make a case for pretty much every runner. The one I like is ASO, a novice hurdler who's improving. Is obviously often what you need in this race, and he jumps well. And with Arzal in there, I think he's bound to get a nice lead, and he should be able to settle. I think he's 25 to 1, and I think he's probably worth the risk because he's also guaranteed to handle the ground, whereas some other fancy ones like Sign of Victory might not be perfect on it, and Calypto's had a breathing operation. He's got a tongue tie. He's wearing a hood. He has the potential to win well, but there are definitely doubts there, and while there are good cases to be made, there are also doubts about lots of them. I think it's worth taking a risk on something interesting, and ASO is the one for me in that.
I think, especially with, like you say, about Calypto, he's had the kitchen sink thrown at him on Saturday, hood, tongue tie, straight after a breathing up fresh. So looks as though everything's primed for a run for him. But like you, I think he's beatable. James, sorry, Dave. 2 old flames for you, isn't it? On Saturday's card, you got Mr. Mole in the Game Spirit and Takin Desol in the Denman chase.
Yep. Obviously, I'm looking forward to seeing Mr. Mole back in action. The new reformed Mr. Mole, the new tough Mr. Mole, since front running tactics have been employed, he's looked a different horse. I've always thought the world of him. You know, yeah, I know. I got laughed at when I suggested that you know, he might after his summer of not quite going through with his efforts, or his spring and summer, I should say, not quite going through his efforts, and he's second to Barryzan in what was the old Swinton, where he travelled like the wrath of God throughout that race. And you could see he was a horse that had an awful lot of talent, even back in those days. And I thought, you know, he might be the sort that, if they sorted his head out, could actually progress and sort of challenge for minor champion hurdle honours. So it's good to see that he's now, I think he's about 155, I think he is now. So I mean, he's passed out. To me, he's out of handicaps. He's going now where he should be going, and I would hope that he'll put up a good show against Cider Grugy on Saturday. Takan Desoy, I still don't think he's a 3 miler. In the back of my head, I think the Ryanair trip suits him a lot better. And this is going to be brutal. You know, this will be a brutal race on Saturday. Houblon, De Zobo, and Coney Gray are going to be tagging each other along. Normally, in these sort of circumstances, you'd say, well, you know what, they're going to set it up for something, and possibly Union East, maybe. But I just think what will happen is Houblon and Coney Gray they're that tough. I just think they'll take each other along into the race, take it in turns, have a share of the front, and I just don't think anything will get to them. I just can't see anything getting to the pair of them. As I say, possibly Union East. Harry Topper's jumping's absolutely gone to pot. I couldn't have him with bad money now. Takan, I just don't think, you know, he'll travel all right to a point, but when push comes to shove, is he able to be able to break both Houblon, De Zobo and Coney Gray? You know, much as I love him, I don't think so. I think I'd rather see him back at 2.5, to be honest.
Well, sounds as though there's going to be plenty to talk about on next week's wrap. James, Dave, thanks a lot for taking your time out this evening. As I said, we've got Super Sunday, Super Saturday to come back and talk about, where no doubt there'll be plenty of market movers for Cheltenham, and also with the weeks ahead and possibly Aintree as well. So, James, Dave, thanks for taking your time out, and we shall see you next week.
Cheers.